Servus aus Berlin. My name is Matthias Rillig, and today I'll talk about how to manage the PhD postdoc transition. So there is a lot of resources typically for PhD students to get advice, less so for postdocs generally speaking, but usually the transitions are sort of the difficult parts of the career path, and so I think it's worth discussing this a little bit. So the first thing I guess that is difficult to readjust to is, or to adjust to in the first place, that is after you have just managed your PhD thesis and you graduated, you might feel that, huge sense of relief. And then when you have secured a postdoc, you have less of a structure. I guess this is the first thing that you will encounter because, you don't have a clear graduation goal after 3-4 years, but now it's more diffuse, and the goals are definitely not as clear as it was during your PhD. And then you have the realization that even if you've just learned a lot because you earned a PhD, you still have a lot to learn. And there's new techniques to be mastered and just new stuff to learn. So it can be a bit sobering in that moment. One of the things that you need to focus on in that transition, sort of planning ahead to potential future career paths, of course, if they are in the academic realm, then it's very important to get some teaching experience, and that is not as straightforward as it sounds, because most of your appointments as a postdoc don't come with a formal teaching requirement. You're usually hired as a researcher and not with a teaching component. So that takes extra effort to sort of get involved in the teaching, get this teaching mentoring experience, and it needs to be done in close dialogue with your PI, because your PI is of course expecting you to deliver on typically a grant, or if it's a fellowship it's slightly different, and they differ a lot in terms of what they would expect in terms of your teaching. But if you're pondering a more academic path, then it's important to get that teaching experience. Volunteer for guest lectures, or volunteer for contributing to small courses or lab sections. Usually that's relatively easy, but needs to be done in dialogue with your PI. And the next thing concerns your research strategy. So during a postdoc, it's important, even more so than during a PhD, that you establish your own research line, something that you are known for. And, there's different ways of doing it. In my case, I did that in a way that that independent research line for me was sort of implicit in my choice of postdoc, because at the time I had basically two choices, and one was with a specialist in more my area, where maybe I would have learned more about the techniques that I was going to apply. And the other option I had was to go to somebody with a completely different perspective and to add the expertise that I had acquired during my PhD to that new lab. And for that reason, that choice already implied a certain level of independence, because I was sort of the expert for mycorrhizae and soils in a completely different lab, had more like an ecosystem focus. And so it is inherent already in the choice of this host lab how difficult it might be to establish your own independent research line that is sort of separate a bit from the one of your PI. Clearly, one thing that's also common your way as a postdoc is just broader responsibilities and expectations. So, of course, as a postdoc, the PI expects you typically to be the expert in some particular field, and that you independently work to solve a particular problem, or to acquire the skills necessary to do so, or learn the methods that are required to do so, sort of on your own. You are contributing your expertise to that group. So that's the research side, but also you may be expected to have additional responsibilities, for example, in grant reporting. So you would be expected to contribute to the report to the funding agency, for example, and maybe take over some of the admin responsibilities, some of the logistics certainly, but also some of the organizational tasks around that project would also be in your court. And that may be quite different than during your PhD. Certainly during your PhD, you also had to write reports, maybe regular reports to your committee. And depending on if you had a scholarship or not, you also wrote reports to a funding agency. But now that will be up-regulated as a function that you will have to fulfill as well. It may also be a good idea to acquire additional experience in sort of the workings of the institutions by volunteering to serve on some committees. What's typically quite a good idea is to serve on search committees where this is possible. For example, it's possible in Germany. For new professor positions, search committees usually have also scientists that are not professors and also students. And so this is a valuable experience because you get to know the process in the particular country that you find yourself in, and is an asset probably later on. So this is more like taking over more of an institutional responsibility as well. And of course, this was already important for your PhD to build a network of colleagues that you can collaborate with. And of course, during your postdoc, this becomes even more important, and it's important from the very beginning to already invest heavily in building a solid network, because these networks are an incredible resource and they are so important for your future success. I think that cannot be overstated how important these networks are. So do invest some of your time definitely in these networks. So you can see, taking this all together, this is quite a complex set of responsibilities. Sometimes you move to different cities, often actually, or different countries or different continents. So there's a lot to think about. So also be patient with yourself and be aware that transition can be quite challenging, and that may be difficult to sort of have understood from the very beginning, because you have just achieved something major, namely to complete a PhD, and but now comes a whole another challenge, and I think it's important to be sort of mentally prepared for that as you manage that transition. But if you think about those points that we have just mentioned, I think you'll have a very good chance of success. Hi there! If you like this video, don't forget to click like down there, and also remember to subscribe to the channel, and feel free to leave comments. See ya!